The elections are here, all you men and people with periods. No, that was not a mental patient from an institution that couldn't understand what a damn woman is, somebody with XX chromosomes. That's actually the candidate for governor, right, of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who locked the state down for months and years on end, who at the end of all of this pseudoscience came back, not begging for us to finally say, hey, I'm sorry for not believing in science. I'm sorry for making you guys all lose your jobs and be away from your family members at their funerals over a disease that has a 99.999% survival rate. No, she comes back and she says, we're really happy at the end of all of this that we're providing free tampons for people with periods. That's the madness that we're facing every single day. And with the midterm elections looming and a threat of a major victory for Republicans because of people like that, the Democrats have really been putting the hammer down on all of us. This couldn't be more true than if you remember at the Pelosi household. If you're into gay orgies, you may like this story if you didn't already die from monkeypox. If you don't like gay orgies, you'll actually like this story even more. Because as many of you have likely heard, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, was assaulted from behind with a hammer in their home on October 28th. Well, naturally, the media on the left went into overdrive. They were just out here like, oh, everybody hates the Pelosis. They try to spin the story to make Republicans out to somehow be at fault. Like, I feel like every time the Democrats do something ridiculous, right, they shut down the country, pump trillions of dollars of cash in, and they go, whoa, how'd this happen? It must have been white people's fault. It's like... However, you look at this and you go, the result of this narrative completely collapses because we investigate and do this little thing called research. And when we look at the Pelosi hammer attack, it shows so much for our country because the circumstances surrounding the assault are extremely bizarre to say the least. If you don't know any background, Paul Pelosi was apparently attacked in an assassination attempt against Nancy Pelosi with a hammer at 2 a.m. in his underwear. But in the immediate aftermath of the story breaking, nearly everybody on the left decided that this would be the perfect way to accuse Republicans of condoning political violence. And once it was reported that the attacker was allegedly there to break the Speaker of the House's knees, that was the official story. He wanted to break her knees. She's like 82, buddy. She probably already has broken knees. She's been dead for 6 years. She's just literally on strings. There's like a puppet behind her making her move. But then they were off to the races because, there was some way the Washington Post found to run a story with the headline was, the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband follows years of the GOP demonizing her. Subtle. Even the White House threw their weight onto the anti-Republican narrative. During our press conference, President Biden stated that what makes us think that one party can talk about stolen elections, COVID being a hoax, it's all bunches of lies. And it's not affect peoples who may be so well balanced. Enough is enough. The attempt there. Dude, what the hell are you talking about? The way they're telling us that, we're the people who believed COVID was a hoax. Buddy, we never said COVID was a hoax. We said your bullshit response was. And the people who question the elections. Dude, you said that the 2020 election was the most undisputed and fair election in the nation's history. Fairer than the actual fair elections. And so their weird attempt to connect anyone to the right of Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney with violence and white supremacy has been at the top of their playbook since Trump's victory in 2016. The idea here is as simple as it is insidious. If they can brand the right wing as violent, then they can leverage the power of the state to crush us in the name of national security and preserving democracy. In this way, the right would never be able to mount to any sort of tangible, real resistance. We would be the status quo, blunt of every joke. That would function only as a controlled opposition party, populated by globalists like Romney, McConnell, and Kevin McCarthy. Now, anyone would pose a real threat to the elite, they would just label us extremists. Any of us who might challenge the narrative, like Alex Jones, or anybody else for that matter. Anyone who would advocate for real change might actually be pushed aside and called somebody who would be a threat to democracy. We'd be deemed violent, thugs, and summarily stuffed out. Moreover, the left understands the world still exists in the shadow of World War II, even though that conflict ended almost 80 years ago. They know most people in America think of the Nazis and Hitler as the big bad guys. We've been brainwashed to forget all of our nation's history, anything of our forefathers. All we know is Hitler bad and Holocaust should have never happened. And sure, it shouldn't have, but they'll make every attempt possible then to compare us, the right wing, to Nazis. Even though that comparison is completely meaningless and we know it, we're tired of it. Oh, you drink water? Well, so did Hitler. Isn't that a little suspicious of you, you little water-drinking Nazi? Now, there's been countless times since 2016 where the left has been pulled out all stops to make this comparison. Many of them have had very suspicious circumstances surrounding them. The infamous Charlottesville rally in 2017 was referenced for years and years, breeding the insidious underdogs like Nick Fuentes, who was a Nazi because he was there. Anybody who was at Charlottesville is a bad person, right? Including the FBI, who seems to have instigated it. That was until Trump. Then they really used it, right? Because January 6th, any instance they can acquire, that event became the gold standard when it comes to painting Republicans as violent. Even though our founding fathers were likely smiling in the graves for a change that day, that there was some real opposition because they were bred out of revolution and out of insurrection or whatever they're calling it these days. Again, we know that there was significant government involvement and knowledge in both events. It's curious, right? I wonder why that could be. That Republicans can barely exist without being accused of trying to create a Fourth Reich. We can't even have a riot without being accused of an insurrection. Meanwhile, the Democrats are out trying to assassinate public officials and burn down city blocks. It gets swept under the rug and labeled as peaceful protesting. Do you remember in June when a leftist traveled from California to the home of Justice Kavanaugh and tried to assassinate him? He did this in the wake of the mysterious leaking of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And this was barely even talked about when it happened, let alone now. What about the Bernie bro who shot Congressman Steve Scalise while he was practicing for a baseball game? That's barely even mentioned. That's despite the fact that the man literally claimed that Trump was a traitor and he was a Bernie supporter. What about the months of violence by BLM that was encouraged and funded by the Democrats? A cursory look back on the last few years will show that most political violence has come from the left. Yet they're never forced to take responsibility. Very few people out there are comparing the left to communist regimes of Stalin and Mao, which are, due for hundreds of millions of people who were murdered in the last century alone. But they're not held responsible in the media at all. There's no national reckoning in any of this. The left is perfectly happy to increase the pressure against the right until it reaches a fever pitch. Yet they get to throw their hands up when violence inevitably ensues and say, oh, we had nothing to do with that. The double standard is so obvious and is intentionally kept in place. And now we arrive at the most recent incident at the Pelosi residence. And again, the left quickly tried to rebrand the attacker as some sort of right-wing boogeyman. There's just one problem. The attacker was an illegal immigrant, and he's not even American. In fact, the guy is actually Canadian and apparently entered the U.S., the southern border, in 2008 as a temporary visitor. After 14 years, I think he's doing a little more than just visiting. Obviously, this throws a wrench in the left's narrative. For once, they're actually the victims of illegal immigrant violence, so they have now pivoted to anything that Republicans are, or saying that Republicans are being too insensitive to the Pelosi's. Okay, I'm sorry, forgive me for my lack of concern for the family that has made millions while the rest of us get scraps and labeled as extremists. And this all raises a few questions, though. Why exactly was an illegal immigrant so concerned with Nancy Pelosi that he wanted to kill her in a suicide mission? Once you start looking into the incident, things get even stranger. When the police originally dispatched, Paul Pelosi referred to his assailant as a friend and stated that he was not in danger. In fact, it wasn't until the police arrived that Mr. Pelosi was attacked. He apparently casually opened the door to the officers and acted as if nothing was wrong. He then randomly stepped back inside. Only then was he hit with a hammer. It was a very strange series of events that makes absolutely no sense. And then there are all sorts of speculation that the attacker is some sort of gay dominatrix paying a visit to Mr. Pelosi. I mean, he may have entered in through the back door. The attacker has a gay pride flag outside of his house, and this is supposed to be a right-wing extremist. That might explain why Mr. Pelosi referred to him as a friend. Maybe this guy is simply taking care of Mr. Pelosi while his wife was in D.C. Ain't nothing wrong with that. We don't kink shame here, It's San Francisco. Everybody's a little gay. And it honestly wouldn't be anything without out the ordinary for these kinds of people and their massive homosexual orgies. They have no boundaries. And right now they are pushing hard to indoctrinate your children with their garbage. A new way of insane, demonic teachers are actively converting your children to degeneracy. That's the only way that they can reproduce. They are actively running cover for pedophiles. They are turning your kids into transgendered freaks, and they're planning on locking you up if you try to stop them. More on that later. So in case you need a recap, if you try to be a patriot of this country, you are going to be labeled a terrorist, an insane megalomaniac. And if you want to preserve traditional values or worship Christ, have a decent country, or anything in between, the left wants you thrown in jail. But if you're a Democrat, well, then you have a carte blanche way to do whatever you want and to say whatever you want. You can say that Trump is a traitor. You can say that white people are evil, and you can peddle the worst degeneracy imaginable to children with no repercussions whatsoever. The right is trapped playing by the other side's rules. Meanwhile, the left is free to continue their agenda. That's the society we currently live in, and it needs to change, and it needs to change right now. And you have to realize that with these people in power, it makes no sense to try to predict the future. I mean, they pump trillions of dollars into the economy. Our dollars are literally meaningless, losing 46% of its value just in the last several decades. I mean, since 1933, we lost 90% of its value. Crypto is trading sideways. It's like, how do I actually protect myself for the future? Which is why I got to remind you guys that my friends at Goldco have one of the most amazing ways that we could protect our savings and our retirement, but you're going to have to listen to this so you don't miss out. People who invest in gold and silver are not upset like everybody else who just kept their money in these bad stock options, because while everything else is changing right now, when you call 855-242-4758, that's 855-242-4758, you can find out how to get up to $10,000 of free silver, and you can actually transfer and invest your savings, your retirement into gold and silver and protect it in something that has withstood the test of time. Guys, I don't know about you, but I actually get afraid of what's happening in the future. So I want to make sure that I'm diversifying my portfolio. These guys are amazing. They've helped me. They can help you. Click the link in the description, fill out the form, talk to them, or call right now. Don't wait until it's too late. Call my friends at Goldco who have a special offer for my slightly offensive backers at 855-242-4758. That's 855-242-4758. Don't wait till it's too late. Call Goldco today. Check it out, what they have for you.